Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and today is part 5 of our Oath of the Gatewatch set review. So we've looked at the white cards, the blue, the black, and yesterday the red. Today we'll be looking at all the green cards as well as the last couple multi-color cards that are left, and tomorrow we will be looking at all the colorless cards and wrap up the set review. We'll then be back on Thursday with a pre-release primer where we're also going to take a closer look at the expeditions since they weren't included in the initial review. So having said that, let's jump into the cards. First off, we have Ballast Pup, and this is an okay limited card if, big if here, you're playing the support mechanic. Maybe you're in the white-green support strategy. If you're doing that, this is okay. If you're not doing that, I don't know if I'm always going to get this into my cut. I might still make it just because I might be desperate for a good 2-drop. But if not, that's really what this card's there for. Now, it's very fragile. It doesn't have a lot of toughness, but it can still trade with something relatively significant, especially if you're able to support on it once and it has a little bit of trample. You might be able to get in for some damage and take out a decent-sized creature. Birthing Hulk. So it's a little pricey. Again, this is going to be a card that's relegated to limited, but it is a 5/4 body, and when you play it, you get 2 Eldrazi Scion tokens, so that does make it worth it. Helps you maybe ramp into some other stuff if you need to, or just have a couple blockers. But having said that, you can regenerate it as well for colorless mana, so maybe that's what you're doing with those Eldrazi tokens. So if you're playing a green/colorless dedicated build, or even if you're just playing green and something else and you have a smattering of colorless sources, this is going to be pretty decent for you. Now, the only thing to keep in mind though in limited is there's a lot of competition for the high end of your curve. There's a lot of high end good creatures in both green and colorless, so there's times where this might get outclassed by something else you want to put on the high end, but if not, it's still very fine and will do some good work for you in limited. Bonds of Mortality. So this one's interesting. Creatures with hexproof and indestructible, you typically don't see a whole lot of them in any one given limited environment. So it sits in your sideboard unless maybe your opponent surprises you with a Sphinx or something like that and you have to deal with the hexproof. Other than that, this is more of a modern sideboard card for me. There are some modern decks that abuse that hexproof, like the Infect deck, and now here's a way to perhaps sideboard against that. So I think that's where this is really going to shine and where you want to keep your eye on this card. Other than that, could make some standard sideboards if the blue control deck starts running away with the meta or something like that. But for the most part, I think this will be a modern playable card. Canopy of Gorger. So it's a big vanilla creature. It's there. It costs 6. It's a 6/5. It's just fine. If you need something at the higher end of your curve that can do some damage, there it is, but it's not super exciting. Like I said, there's tons of competition when you start looking at the 6, 7, 8 slot, and really you only want a couple of those cards in your limited deck at best. So if this is taking up one of those spots, you might not be in a good situation with your card pool, but it's there if you need it. Not super exciting. Elemental Uprising, and this is a decent combat trick. It's basically going to be removal in most cases. This is a lot better in limited on the defensive though, so your opponent attacks in, you can surprise them by turning one of your creatures into a 4/4. I think it's less good when you use it when you're on the offensive and you're trying to get in there, because it does force your opponent to block it, number one, and they get to choose which creatures are blocking it, so you might get less value out of it, but still a good defensive combat trick for sure in limited. Embodiment of Insight. So yesterday we saw the red card that gave all your land creatures trample. Well, here's the one that gives them Vigilance. And just like the card we saw yesterday, when you play a land, you get to animate one of your lands as a 3/3 haste creature. So that's actually pretty cool. If you're all in on landfall, this is fantastic for you in limited, especially if you have the copy of the red card to go along with it. That's fantastic. If you don't, it's still okay. It's a 4/4 for 5 with Vigilance. It doesn't have evasion, but you are able to animate your lands periodically, so that's actually pretty interesting. So it's not bad at the 5 hole if you need something there. But if you are all in the landfall strategy and you're complementing that with a lot of the Battle for Zendikar landfall cards, this becomes very good. Glade Cavalry. So here's the deal with this card. Again, it's competing with a lot of good stuff in the higher casting cost range. However, if you're going wide, this is a pretty good card. It's a 6/6 body, but that's not super relevant because honestly, it just doesn't have evasion. It is a very good defensive card though, because it can actually block and take care of some Eldrazi's, or even just this card and one other could take care of probably most of the cards you'll be up against if they come in to attack you. So that's not a bad thing on the defensive posturing side. But what's really cool about this card is the support mechanic. So if you're going wide, you're playing with a lot of Scion tokens, or you're playing the green-white ally deck, this becomes something that you may consider using in limited for sure. So it's not always going to make your cut, but in that deck it becomes much better. Harvester Troll. This one, not super exciting for me in limited. I'd have to be pretty desperate for a 4-drop to probably put this in my deck. Here's my issue with it. You're paying 4 for a 2/3 and sacrificing a creature or land to get 2 counters on it. Okay, now I have a 4/5, but it doesn't have evasion. It's a decent blocker, but I'm giving up some of my board state to do it. Here's what's weird about this card. If they printed this as a 4/5 for 4 mana, it'd probably be too good, a little too quick. But if they printed it as a 4/5 for 5 mana, it probably would be not good enough. So this is the kind of awkward in between, and it doesn't really do it for me. Lead by example. I do like this card. It does give you a quick combat trick, even if you're not into the whole support deal. This is just going to give 2 of your creatures +1/+1 permanently, and you do it at instant speed, so you can hopefully catch your opponent off guard when they attack in. So this is a very good combat trick, and it also lends itself to being aggressive after you play it. Loam Larva. This is okay in certain decks. If you're trying to go multicolors, this is pretty good for you. It's going to just help you get there. It's a little slow, but if you need to play 4 or in some cases 5 colors maybe, you'll be happy to have this. Other than that, you're probably not really including this. Maybe sideboarding it in against an especially aggressive deck, but that's about it. Natural State, and this is a sideboard card. It's probably going to stay in your sideboard most of the time though. There's not a lot of fantastic artifacts or enchantments that cost 3 or less in the set that you're going to want to blow up with this thing. There's a few, so when your opponent does have one of those, you just side it in. And that's pretty much, I think, all we're going to see with this card. Next is Netcaster Spider, and this was a reprint from the core set a couple years back, and this did some good work for me in the core set when I played it in limited. It's a 2/3 reach for 3, and if you block a flying creature, you get 2 extra points of power. It's actually pretty decent, especially against mid-range flyers, so easily able to include this in your limited deck. This is Judgement. It's a tad expensive, but this is green removal. It's the closest thing you're going to get to green removal, at least in this set. So it is what it is. You'll play it. You might not be super happy with the cost, but it will get the job done. I mean, you're going to be able to support 2, and then at least those 2 creatures are going to be able to do direct damage to another creature. That's pretty good. It's going to take care of most threats, and let's face it, if you're in green, you're going to need this for removal. This Voice of Zendikar. Now, when this was originally leaked, a lot of people were disappointed by the 3 loyalty. I think that's just fine. She only costs 3. I mean, she's got a very competitive casting cost. 3 loyalty, quickly ticks up to 4, and she can defend herself with a token. That's actually kind of awesome. Her -2 ability, very relevant considering the support and cohort mechanics that's playing along with the allies, especially in the Selesnya colors, but even into all 5 colors to some degree. This is pretty awesome. I like the design of the ultimate as well, because it's not just a board scoop game ending situation. I mean, you're probably going to win the game if you do this, but your opponent at least has a chance to play out of it. So this is a great design card. I really like it. As far as power level goes, I think it's easily standard playable, and yeah, obviously it's a bomb in limited. Oath of Nissa. Speaking of great cards, this one is the best of the oaths. Definitely my favorite. It's just dig. It's letting you dig for really whatever you need. In the early game, if you need land or color fixing, you got it. If you need a creature in the mid game, you got it. If you happen to have a planeswalker in your limited deck, you can grab it if it's in the top 3 cards. This just does so much. And as far as its stagnant ability, it's still not super exciting, especially in limited, but it's probably the best out of all the ones, I think. I think it's actually usable in formats like Commander and maybe some other casual formats or Cube. So I don't know. I like this one a lot. I think this is going to be a big deal. This is definitely strong enough to see standard play. Potentially could make its way into some modern decks. I think it's that good. And yeah, limited, you'll be happy to play it for sure. Pulse of Merasa, and this is a kind of a limited regrow effect, but it's still good. You can get a creature or land. It gives you a little bit of life to make up for the fact that you can't take anything, but it is what it is. Having said that, it's still very good because it is at instant speed. And a lot of people don't like regrow type effects to go back to your hand, but I mean, they can be very powerful. Look at Eternal Witness, look at Den Protector, look at the original regrowth. At one point that was actually restricted. So yeah, this card is going to be very good. I think it could definitely see some standard play. I think it's strong enough to get there, and this gets better when you get hopefully more graveyard shenanigans in Shadow over Innistrad, so keep an eye out for that as well in the future. But yeah, I would certainly not hesitate to play this in limited either. Rune in their wake. This is actually a very eloquent design. I really like this because it's interesting. If you're in maybe a green/colorless build and you're just trying to ramp to some Eldrazi's, then this is basically a rampant growth. It will let you ramp and get your Eldrazi's as long as you have a waste in play. But if you're using this to fix colors, like maybe you're in a multi-color ally deck trying to make use of cohort and support, or maybe you're just trying to go deep by splashing another color, this kind of does that for you too. It does your color fixing without necessarily the ramp. So it's a good card, and it definitely has a lot of use. Now, not every deck is going to need this in limited, but you'll be happy it's there when you're in one of those two types of builds for sure. Next is Saddleback Ellagic, and to me this is for the support deck. This is for the wide deck. If you're in that deck, you may play this if you don't have any better 4-drops, but on its own it's not super exciting. It's very fragile, being 3/1. The support's nice if that's what you needed to do, but if say you're in a more ramp style deck trying to ramp into bigger things, this probably kind of becomes obsolete for you in limited. So it's there in that particular archetype. Next is Scion Summoner, and this is pretty economical. You're getting a 2/2 for 3, but you're also getting a Scion token, so you're actually getting 3 power and toughness on the board for 3. That can be quite good, especially considering your Scion token can be sacrificed for colorless mana, which turns on a lot of great stuff or helps you ramp. So this is good. I think it's a fantastic limited card. It gives you a good amount of value. Next is Seed Guardian. So this is a 3/4 with reach for 4. It costs 2 green and 2 colorless, so it's a little harder to cast than some, a little harder to splash. So it's not super exciting. There's a lot of good things you can be doing at the 4-drop. This is a little more defensive, so that's fine, especially if your opponent has some creatures in their limited build. You can side this in. What's interesting about this card, aside from that though, is it does recover very well from board sweeps, and there's a good chance in standard board sweeps could be a thing coming up, just because it feels like it's time for control to maybe put together or run in the meta. It just feels like there's a lot of elements there. So this card does stand up to Languish, so keep an eye on that. This is also another card that could get better after Shadows over Innistrad comes out. Stalking Drone. So this is a pumper, but it does pump for dedicated colorless mana, which makes it a little more awkward. Now, if you're in a deck that has a lot of dedicated colorless mana, this will be an okay limited card for you. Or if you just need something in the 2-drop, I mean, it's still a Grizzly Bear, it's still playable, but there may be better 2-drops for you. I do like pump effects on cheap creatures, but the fact that it's colorless may paint you into a corner a little bit. Speaking of 2-drops, this is one that might outclass the previous one. This is a Sylvan Advocate, and I'm not going to compare this to Tarmogoyf because it's not as powerful as Tarmogoyf, obviously, but it costs 2. You get a 2/3 Vigilance creature. That's actually pretty decent. And then later in the game, when you control 6 lands, now it's a 4/5 for 2. That's actually kind of awesome. So now it doesn't have evasion, which is going to hold it back a little bit, but it is a very defensive card. And let's face it, you can attack in with this, and a 4/5 is probably more than halfway there to killing some of the Eldrazi's if they try to attack in with them. So you could take this and another card and perhaps be able to put together a good joint block to take care of a very dangerous threat. So this is a decent card. It's going to be great for you in limited. I would play this without hesitation for sure. It's rare, so you won't see it all the time. And as far as its power level goes, I think it's strong enough to see some standard play. I wouldn't be shocked there. Now, obviously, it's not going to be a force in modern or anything because you got Tarmogoyf there. It's just going to do this type of thing better and faster, but this could definitely see standard play. Tajuru Path Warden, and here's a 5-drop 5/4 Vigilance Trample. Much like the previous card, this one is going to do well if you have some Eldrazi's coming at you. This and the previous card could probably joint block and take care of most of the Eldrazi threats out there. So you gotta kind of weigh that. This is also an ally, so it plays really well in the support cohort strategy, especially if you're in Selesnya colors. It's a decent creature. Now, it is a 5-drop, So you got to weigh that with your other high casting cost, mid to high casting cost cards that you have in your limited deck. But if you have room for it, I think it will do some work. File Redeemer. Now here's another card that's very good against board sweepers, so keep an eye on that. I think that's very, very relevant coming up in the future. So aside from that, though, this is a 3/3 for 3, which is still very competitive, and it has flash, so that's awesome. And maybe you just lost one creature and you get one Eldrazi token out of it. Now you're getting 4 power and toughness on the board at instant speed for 3. That's actually kind of awesome. So that's fantastic in that situation, but yeah, it gets even better if there's a board sweep. So it's a rare. Again, you're not going to see it all the time in limited, but when you do, yeah, it's easily playable, and potentially it could see a little bit of play in standard, even if it's just sideboard play. Next is Vines of the Recluse, and it's a combat trick. It's real cheap. Has some added value maybe if you're playing some surge cards or something like that, but on its own, it's not one of my favorite combat tricks. It just doesn't quite do enough. I mean, it could surprise your opponent and take out a small flyer, and so in that case you may want to sideboard it in those situations, but other than that, it's not super exciting. Next is Worldbreaker. This one's a mythic, and it costs 7. Here's the thing with this card. You get a 5/7 reach with an interesting ability. You can exile a artifact, enchantment, or land when it comes into play, and you have the ability to recur it from your graveyard, and then when you cast it again, you again can take out another artifact, land, or enchantment. So it's decent. It's actually very decent, but it doesn't have evasion, and it does cost 7. Like I've been saying through this video, there's a lot of competition at that spot. So this is a fine creature. If this is your 7-drop, you're going to be happy. But there are times it might get outclassed by some of the other big Eldrazi's out there, especially the colorless ones that we'll look at tomorrow that are quite good, a few of them. So having said that, there's value to be had here. I mean, you get a 5/7 body. It's pretty significant. It can block just about anything in the game, including flyers, and if it does get destroyed, if you can sacrifice a land and bring it back into play, your opponent is at the very least going to lose a land as well. So not a bad card for limited. Zendikar Resurgence. So this one is interesting. Mana Flare effects, of course, are very powerful. Mana Flare is seen standard play, as have Mary's Wake. This one's a little too expensive, though, to kind of put in that category. So even the ramp decks, and once you're up to 7 mana, you're pretty much doing what you need to be doing. You're on the right track there. So this isn't going to do too much more for you. Taking the turn off to play this probably won't be very beneficial. And that includes not only limited, but I think standard as well. I just think it's a win more. Having said that, I feel like this is a great commander card. And this is really cool for commander decks that can get there a little faster because they're playing mana rocks and stuff. And then they throw this out on the board and they can just play some big battle cruiser magic with it and also draw some cards off of it as well. That's really what this is designed for, I think, and I really like the art on it too. I like to see all the planeswalkers together. It's actually pretty cool. Next is Jiraga Auxiliary, and this is a very fine limited card. So basically you get a 2/3 body for 3, and later in the game when you have some extra mana to spend, to be able to continually support 2 is nothing to scoff at. It's sure even better if you're going wide with maybe Scion tokens, or you're in the Selesnya deck with a lot of allies. It becomes that much better, but this is probably good in just about any build. If you got a couple creatures to give the support to, it's going to be great. Repeatable support. Your opponent's got to deal with this, or else it's just going to take over the game. So it's a very, very fine limited card for sure. And the last card of the day is the lone Simic card. It's Void Grafter, and this one is another flash creature. This time you get a 2/4, and when it enters the battlefield, it allows you to make another creature hexproof, so basically protecting it from a direct damage or a destroy spell. That's very relevant for 3. A lot of value to be had in this card. I'd be more than happy to play it in limited if I'm in those colors. Potentially, maybe you could see some sideboard play in standard. I think it's just competitively costed enough to maybe get there, so keep an eye on it. But having said that, those are all the green cards and all the multicolor cards in the set. So we're going to be back tomorrow with all the colorless cards. Until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day.
Hey, thanks as always for watching. This video, like all my videos, was made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Even a donation of $1 helps me to keep growing this community and creating better quality videos for all of you. Check out our Patreon page for exclusive giveaways and future goals for the channel. If you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the MTG news, spoilers, set reviews, product openings, or finance videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a good day.